Okay. And it lost it. That is so strange. So this actually was connected somewhere else. It was on our live stream because I set this camera up where we can use it for the live stream on Sunday. And for some reason it went up there. Okay, so next week, Mother Amy is going to be here. Please be here to still be here, be with each other, and be here with Mother Amy. And just as a note too about today, because we are combining what we did last week and what we did this week, I don't have any music or videos for today's class. I took them out. And all of our discussion questions will not be discussions. And so some of them I have changed to be food for thoughts. And so you can write them down and think about them at home. But if you want to write down like a word of the day, the theme we're going to look at particularly in chapter 1 is be strong and courageous. And extra points if you write down how many times that pops up, because I will ask you in a couple of slides how many times it's going to pop up. Be strong and courageous, yes. This is a little bit of review. What we looked at 2 weeks ago is that the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, is in 3 parts. There is the Torah, which is the law, and then there is the prophets. And Joshua is the first of the prophets, but he serves as this transition. We are transitioning from the law that has been given us. The prophets show us how we live out the law. Joshua is the perfect example of how the law essentially is to be lived out. We also talked 2 weeks ago, and this is just one part to keep in mind, is that there is a collection of authors or school. They kind of share lots of similar thoughts about God, how you follow God, how you live in the world. Nerdy people call that the Deuteronomist author. And so Joshua is right in this school. And so a lot of the themes, the language, the ideals presented in the book of Deuteronomy are also in the book of Joshua. And that's not too important to know except this. The view is that anyone can follow God if you follow the law. I love that you are quoting it because I said that so many times 2 weeks ago. I will say it like a lot more times today. That made me so excited. Anyone can follow God if you follow the law. We will see that in particular today with the story of Rahab, which is my favorite, besides the angel story, of what we're looking at in today's lesson. Anyone can follow the God if you follow the law. It doesn't matter where you were born. It doesn't matter if you're a girl. It doesn't matter if you're a child. It doesn't matter if you're not an Israelite. Anyone can follow God if you follow the law. And that leads to this question. For me is, will I follow God's law? Will I be obedient or will I be disobedient? We will see where that plays out in the story of Joshua. We also talked about some of the just facts about who Joshua is. The only part I want to remind you is his name is Yahweh saves, or God saves. And in Hebrew, the name Joshua and the name Jesus are the same name. And so sometimes you might pick up like a Greek version of the Bible. And if you read like from the apocryphal books, there is one that there's the son of Jesus. In some translations, we'll say the son of Joshua. That always confused me. And I was like, oh, it makes sense. It's the same name. Just in English, we have Jesus and Joshua as different names. The other part I just want to hold on to is that Joshua is presented as this new Moses. And we will see now all 3 of these today, where Moses crossed the Red Sea, Joshua is going to lead Israel to cross the river. Where Moses met God and walked on holy ground at the burning bush, Joshua is going to get his holy ground experience with the angel, which is how we'll close today's lesson, and we'll talk about that story again. And where Moses sent the 12 spies, Joshua sends the 2 spies. And so there are lots of parallels between the story of Joshua and the story of Moses. And if you see more parallels between those stories, mark them, because it really repeats the story of Moses. But where Moses sometimes messed up, Joshua does it better. Don't tell anyone I said that. The other thing that we talked about, I skipped where I was going, is a little bit about the authorship. I'll come back to this point. But remember some of the really good points to hold on to in Joshua. This is a story about God's justice on evil. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. It is more than just a national agenda. It's more than just a military campaign. It's more than Israel's strategic plan to win the best battles. It's about God's justice on evil. We will see how that gets emphasized here. It's not about a nation's might. It's about what God is doing. That's how it's presented in the text. This is a fulfillment of God who has promised a home for the people of Israel, and that promise is going to get fulfilled. It's a reminder or a question about my own faithfulness to God's covenant. Anyone can follow God if you follow the law. We're seeing Joshua follow that and ask me, will I do the same? And there's this big question, which we'll end our discussion with, in that story of the angel, about following my agenda or following God's agenda. And you can sort of summarize the whole book with obedience, 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 which is what we had looked at 2 weeks ago. The other part we have mentioned is that some people are uncomfortable with this book because of the warring that goes on, what we would call today genocide. That should make you uncomfortable. It's a good thing to wrestle with when you read this book. And also some of the factuality, which we'll see come up today, but just keep in mind is that this book is writing about this late Bronze Age period, but it's written during the late Iron Age. And we'll see that today when they name the number of troops. But most of the time, that's not too important. Just keep in mind that this is written almost half a millennium later than the stories that it is writing about. And this was our food for thought that we ended 2 weeks ago with, and we will revisit a similar question, is how do we decipher my own goals versus what is God's call? And Joshua is aware of that tension, and in the text, they will give you reminders to decipher that for yourself as well. Okay, that was our very, very brief review. Today, as we're doing Joshua, we're going to see this emphasis on covenant. And remember, when we get to Judges after Joshua, we will see that emphasis on chaos. But today, you will begin to see covenant unfolding. I did not write the subtitle, if you will, of each chapter in the notes. And so if you're into writing that down, Joshua chapter 1, it's be strong and courageous. That for me is the theme of chapter 1. It's going to start out with Moses has died, and we very, very quickly jump into the action that Joshua is the new leader. Joshua is spoken to directly kind of by God, and he is the one who is he's the new leader. And so here's the picture of Moses almost ordaining Joshua. That happens earlier back in the book of Numbers and again in Deuteronomy. But now we're seeing that take place. We jump straight into the story of Joshua's ark. As a fulfillment of that, the same promises that were given to Moses, the very same things are given to Joshua. Here's a map. So like over here is Israel, right? And you can see like kind of where the river is. We'll look at some maps later. The heart of the promised land is between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. That's where the promised land. But there's also this like greater Israel border that gets mentioned here. And here's some artist depiction of that. It's all of the known world, essentially. If you live in this area of the world, this is as far as you get when it comes to big boundaries. You're going to the Nile River all the way to the Euphrates up here. And so it's just as far as you can go, because you don't go farther than that. And so this is to say, look, Joshua, I promised great things for Moses about making a home and making my way of life here, and those same promises go to you. That's the point of verses 3 through 5. Any questions on that part? Okay. If you have your Bible in front of you, start to pay attention. And I'm going to spread out some Bibles because I will ask you in a second about... Okay, this table gets extra points. They both have their Bibles. Hold on to be strong and courageous. So verses 6 through 7, Joshua is given this mandate, this command, be strong and courageous. I'm going to read these verses. Verse 6, be strong and courageous, for you shall lead this people to possess the land that I swore to their ancestors to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to act in accordance with all the law that my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn away from the left nor from the right. Oh, I said that backwards. Do not turn from it to your right hand or to your left, so that you may be successful wherever you go. This is a very structured, it's the mandate. Remember, Joshua is a book about battle. They are preparing for battle, and it begins with Joshua, be strong and courageous. Look, Moses was a big deal before you, but the same promises I gave him, just as much as I was there for Moses, I will be there for you too. Be strong and courageous, and follow the covenant. Don't depart from my law. And that is also the big theme. In the very next verse, in verse 8, this verse will sound familiar to you. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to act in accordance with all that is written in it. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall be successful. Remember the context of Joshua. They are getting ready to go into battle against, these rather large city-states. And they're a ragtag group that's lived in the desert for 40 years, out in the wilderness. They are not the big group here coming in. They're the little guys, essentially, is the idea you get. And the strategy is not go train your men, go sharpen your swords, go, reseal your leather sandals so they're ready for running. It's meditate on my law. And so there is an emphasis here. It's not about building like the national strength. It's God's battle that's playing out. Okay, so hold on to moments like that, because the emphasis, it's not really Joshua and Israel who wins the battle. It's God who wins the battle. And that's important to hold on to. And then that gets to this promise in verse 9. You probably know this verse. You have probably heard it before. In fact, it has been popping up for us since the very beginning when we introduced the book of Joshua. And it's probably one of the most famous verses from this book. I hereby command you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. When I was in high school, I was given my first necklace that was like a Christian necklace. And it was this shield, which has just occurred to me is probably because it's from Joshua. It had a cross on the front, and on the back it said, be strong and courageous. The Lord your God is with you wherever you go. That was a verse that I held on to in high school, and it meant a lot to me. I want to say one thing about that. This was a verse that was to Joshua, and it was specific to Joshua's situation and what Joshua was called to. But what we get in a verse like this is a glimpse of the God that we follow. We have a God that calls us to actions, calls us to missions, and a God that is with us in the work. And so this gives us a glimpse of the type of God that we have. We have a God that is faithful to be with us wherever God has called us. And so if you have a stage in your life, or like Poppy this morning, she crawled into our bed and Rachel was talking about a dream that she had. Poppy leans over and just pops up and goes, maybe that was God. And God's telling you it's going to be okay. It was very adorable. But however you feel like God speaks to you or God calls to you, God is faithful to be with you in that. And so even though this is a verse that's Joshua's verse, it can be your verse too. Maybe it's not about you going out to battle, but it could be about whatever it is in life that God has called you into. God is faithful, and God will be with you to be wherever you go. Be strong and courageous. That moves then into the second part of chapter 1. This is the section that is going to change who is the one doing the commanding and the speaking. So this very first section, God is doing the commanding and the speaking to Joshua. We are beginning to see the hierarchy of a leadership structure. So, chapter 1 is solidifying Joshua as the new leader. He is the new Moses. And so now Joshua is the one who's going out to give the commands. Before God was commanding Joshua, now Joshua commands Israel. He first speaks to the officers, and then the officers end up speaking on their behalf. They are given 3 days to get ready, to make camp. to prepare themselves for this battle that's about to take place before they cross over the Jordan. And so now Joshua is the one giving the commands. And then there's this note in verses 12 through 15 about the half-tribe of Manasseh, the tribe of Gad, and the tribe of Reuben. Now, you might remember when you read the book of Numbers, and let me actually show you the next slide, that because you've memorized this map, and this is what you think about a lot, is that when they crossed the Red Sea, Moses led them up on this side. And then you realize that they went over here, and you said, hey, wait a second, they were supposed to go to the Promised Land, that's over there, they're over on this side, what's up with that? And then you might remember, too, that the Gadites and the Reubenites and some of the Manassites looked at all this land, and they fought two really big battles, the battle with Og and the battle of Bashan. And all of this nice land was there, and they had all these sheep with them, and they said, hey, this land's pretty good. We already run some battles. I want to stay here. And this became a big deal back in the book of Numbers, because all of Israel was supposed to go into the Promised Land together. And some of the tribes were like, I want to stay back here. So they made this compromise. They said, we will stay and settle in this land, but we will send our young men who can fight, and they will serve as the vanguard. And the vanguard, I had to look that up when we were back in Numbers. They're the ones who serve at the very front of the army. So they say, we'll stay here, but we'll go in the front, which means most of us will die. We're at the front of the army. And now we're seeing this come to fruition. And so there was a reminder here, hey, all the tribes are going to come over, and your fighting force is going to come over with us, even though the others are going to stay. That's what that verse is about. And then here's where it is. Here on the map is Jericho, just so you know where you are. They are right over on the other side of it. And we will look at some maps later that are going to be kind of zoomed in and a little bit down. So it will look like Jericho's on the top, but just so you see where we are on the map. Jericho is right there, and then that's Jerusalem, if you can see where it is. On the other maps, I put stars on it so you can see where it is. And then we're going to see the response in verses 16 through 18. And I find this to be some of the craziest, strange response from the crowd. So they say, yes, Joshua, we are going to do what you say. In fact, we are so serious. If anyone disobeys you, we will see to it that they are put to death. That would be a normal, when you're being conscripted into an army and you're trying to mutiny, that person would be put to death. So they are solidifying the leadership structure. But then they end this in the strangest way. And can someone read just the very last verse of chapter 1, if you have it?
Anyone who rebels against your order and does not obey your words in all that you command him will be put to death. Above all, be strong and courageous.
Only be strong and courageous. And so here is a question. How many times does be strong and courageous get repeated in chapter 1? At least, yes, it is 4. So there's 3 times from God, and just in case you didn't notice it, we threw it in again at the end. And you might remember that the number 3 is one of those symbolic numbers that kind of means completion like that. And this extra 1 is just to drive the point home. That's from the crowd. I just find that to be the most fascinating response. And they're like, what if everyone who was called to do a hard work, that those who are usually those who fight you, could say, just be strong and courageous, we'll help you out. That would be nice. And so, yeah, that's chapter 1. Be strong and courageous. Also, I'm just realizing I must have not finished changing my slide because it says don't forget subtitle. Because sometimes I make the subtitles or the chapter summaries at the very end once I've finished it. That's kind of embarrassing. Here's a food for thought for chapter 1. So not a discussion question, but God promises Joshua that he will never be forsaken or forgotten in the mission God has called him into. And this is met with the encouragement, be strong and courageous. What mission has God called you to? How have you felt God not forsaking you? And then how do we be strong and courageous? Those are good moments to hold on to. Imagine that you talked about that. Later, we're going to have a moment when we get to share that and write them down. So We'll go ahead, though, and move on to chapter 2. I love the story of Rahab. Rahab, for me, is like one of my favorite characters, I think. She's just awesome. And so chapter 2 is about the spies in Jericho. It's also the witness of Rahab, and she's cool. We'll talk about her story. Let me tell you this, too. Do you know this music? The dun da 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 dun da 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 da. Yeah. Okay. So this is Mission Jericho, and so your mission, if you choose to accept it, spies, is to infiltrate the strongest city in the area. In fact, just in case you're curious, Jericho is the longest continuously inhabited city, and so they have a sign if you go to Jericho today. Here's a picture of perhaps what ancient Jericho would look like. I am sorry that this is blurry. I spent a while trying to find a better version of this picture, but it was shared on Facebook 10 million times, and I couldn't get to the original. But there's these big walls that are around it. That's going to become a theme. And here, you can't really see it here, but it's what ancient Jericho looks like today. So cities move and stuff from where they were at ancient times, because just like Knoxville has expanded, this today is central Knoxville. When I was a kid, it was West Knoxville, and East Knoxville got forgotten. That's kind of what's happened with Jericho. Okay, so the mission is to go into Jericho, which is scary. Like, that's a scary thing to do. And there comes to be this crisis. So these two spies are going to enter into Rahab's house, which in your text might call her a prostitute, or you may have seen that said before. If you've ever watched a show, and you might know that, like, oftentimes on the edge, travelers will live in a house. They might go there to get food. They might also have company for the night. But that's also a place that everyone would go to get information. And ladies in the night are really good about getting information from travelers who's coming in and out of the city. So think about Rahab as the one who owns that house. And so she's a proficient businesswoman. And the king knows who she is too. We're going to see that come up too. The crisis comes is that someone, maybe one of those ladies in the night, lets the king know to another spy, like, hey, these spies came in the city, and Rahab's hiding them from you. And so Rahab comes, or the king sends someone to Rahab. And he's like, hey, who are these guys coming here? And she says, oh, they came, but then they left. And so we are going to see some of the bravery of Rahab. And there's this deception that's going to take place. She kind of plays hide and seek with the king. And so Rahab is going to hide these two spies in her house or her place of business. And then the kind of crux of the story in Rahab's come. Oh, I skipped. After she hides them, she sends them out of her house in a place they can hide, and is going to give them further instruction later. But this is the crux of the story. What is the point of the Deuteronomist view? Anyone? Susan knows it.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Anyone can follow God if you follow God.
Anyone can follow God if you follow the law. Anyone can follow God. And we're going to see the first picture of that with Rahab. Because here in verse 8, Rahab with the spies is going to acknowledge who God is and what God is doing. She says, look, I know that Yahweh is God, and Yahweh will win this land. And so she's going to strike a deal with the spies. She says, I will see to it that you are safe. I will lie to the king and everything. You guys go out and hide for 3 days. And once you see the pursuers come back, then, hide out of the rocks and the crevices, go back to your camp. But when you come back in the land, I'll make sure you're safe. When you come back, you save me and my family and my parents. And they say, yes, that's a good deal. We will take it. And so a lot of the stories that you're going to see with Rahab, you're often going to have this red right here. If you just look up Rahab, you'll see the red in the window. And I like this kind of icon version because here she's hiding them. Here they are coming out the window. And that scarlet cord makes an appearance. And so they escape out of the window. And then they make this covenant essentially with this red cord. And so does it remind you anything, red around a window or a door being the thing that saves you?
The
Remind you of the Passover, yes. Okay, remember, the story of Joshua is going to have lots of parallels to the story of Moses. And this one is reminiscent of the Passover. So the deal that the spies say is, look, we're going to do what you say, but when we come back, if your red cord is not over the window, if it's not sticking out and we can't see it, we can make no promises for your safety. But if it's there, we will keep you safe and your family and everyone who's in your house. And it becomes that sign of their covenant. It's like a Passover. Does that make sense there? Okay. And so you'll often see that. And then the spies are going to return and make a report. A lot of the pictures that when I was looking at the two spies, there was them like carrying the big grapes. And that seemed to be a recurring pattern. So in my train of thought of curiosity, I wanted to see the oldest picture I could find. And it's this 5th century mosaic. And which, for some reason, a lot of Joshua stories are 5th century mosaics. But this is the oldest one I could find of the two spies. And you'll see them carrying the big grapes. And I did not read this anywhere, but I'm making this up, but this is my informed thought. I think it's because this is reminiscent of the 12 spies. And so if you remember in the story of the 12 spies, they come back in the book of Numbers carrying all the fruit and everything. And they're like, look, that land is too big for us to go into. We can't do that. And so I think the art was to remind you of that. And I'm going to stick to it with that being the case.
There's also that song, I heard it through the grapevine.
hey, we'll add that. I like that one. Yeah. That's a very quick version of the story of Rahab. And we are going to have an open discussion with all of us together about her story. I love her story. Here's the question, though. What do you see as the main points of Rahab's stories and her actions? Okay? Who was she? Like, what position did she have in society and where she lived? What did she do? And why did she do it? And then we're going to, the main question is, what are some contemporary parallels to the story of Rahab? And what might God be speaking to you through the story and the witness of Rahab?
It seems more self-serving than I had thought in the past.
Okay.
This is a deal to side with the winners, so your family will be protected, and you will too. And she knows who the winners are going to be because somehow she's a believer in Yahweh. So
yes. So there we get the idea. This is some self-protection, but she picked the losing side if you're using logic.
Yeah, but
and so we get that her motivation comes.
Yahweh's going to win.
Yeah.
She somehow knew that. I don't know how,
But she had heard before that they had already conquered two of those nations. So she was already informed that they had already won.
She was informed.
And she was just, in some ways, covering her bases, both sides.
She still has taken a very large leap of faith.
Yes.
And that is what we see in her story. Maybe she's using some logic. It seems like she makes the illogical decision. She lives in Jericho. Nobody can defeat Jericho. Have you seen their walls? They've got more than one. I mean, Jericho's crazy. And they go up against Jericho. Like, she was in the safest place she could be. But she still takes this big leap of faith.
She was also an outsider. I mean, she was not a holy woman, shall we say.
Yes. Okay, and keep that in mind too. She's a shady character, which lots of the people in the Bible are shady characters. And remember who Rahab becomes the father of, or not the father. Wow, I'm gonna excuse myself of that patriarchal statement. That becomes the parent of. Who is her son? Is what I was trying to say. Do you remember her son? Is Boaz, who's married to Ruth, who becomes the grandparents of David, who Jesus comes through. She was a Canaanite, and maybe not the best of the Canaanites. She has a powerful witness. It's a powerful witness of who can be included in the story of God. And that's to say, anyone can follow God if you follow the law. Anyone can follow God. It doesn't matter your background, who you are now. Turn to God. What are some of the things she does, though, in her society and position? Remember, the king comes to her directly, and she lies, and she hides stowaways, and she keeps them safe. she puts her own neck out for these two spies. There are a lot of parallels, and in my Bible it has a story about, I lost the part, Rahab from a Cuban perspective. When there was a totalitarian regime, the story of Rahab became a powerful witness for the Christians who lived there. That also became a powerful story for a lot of Christians in Nazi Germany that would house Jews in their house. They would keep them, they would lie about it to keep them safe. The story of Rahab can be a very powerful story of what we do, of how we're subversive, of how we stand up against power structures to keep people safe. Does anybody feel inspired by her story? Maybe not as many. I love her story. I think she's awesome. Okay. We're going to move on through because we're doing 2 lessons in 1 today to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is going to remind you of something. It should remind you of the crossing of the Red Sea. We will look at a fuller version of this artwork in a minute, but hold on to that the Ark of the Covenant is the thing that splits the sea. It's not Joshua really who does it. It's God who's doing it. But when we jump into chapter 3, we're going to see that they are making camp at this little town called Sidon, which is up here. And across the river is Jericho. Remember I told you this map kind of pans down? And so I put stars, I thought. Oh, maybe I didn't put stars. But here's where Jericho is up here. And they are just on the other side of the river. And they're making their preparations to cross over. Because this is like the real promised land, is between the sea and the river over here. And so they're getting ready for this to happen. And they're given instructions for how you are to do that. So remember, after that 3 days, they have 3 days to get ready. They are going to follow the Ark of the Covenant. This is going to be a major theme. The Ark is the thing that goes before them. Do you remember what's in the Ark? Here's that picture of it. It has the 10 Commandments. It has a jar of the food they eat. You remember? Of the manna. Yeah. So this is, there's other things inside of it too, but it holds the sacred items. Like when God has reached down and touched people, like God at first made those tablets. God sent the manna from heaven. It's the relics. It's the spiritual things. And when God has come and interacted with the world, this is like their most sacred item. I just want you to think for a second. If you're about to go on a battle and you have your most sacred item, where would you put that?
Not out front.
Not out in front. Yeah. You're going to put it in the most secured spot. But God's the one who leads the battle. God's the one who fights the battle. And so as we get into this next verse, they're supposed to follow the ark as they cross and as they go forward. And we're even going to get instructions on how they're going to go about that. And so in verses 4 through 5, let me just make a note of why I worded it this way. For me, the theme on that verse is holiness. For something to be holy is to be set apart or to be different. Same thing with the word sanctified. It's something that's holy, set apart. It's different. There's this idea of holiness first with the ark. So they have a 2,000 cubit. That's a long distance between the ark and all of them. That's to say, like, someone on a chariot could sweep by really, really quickly and come and pick up that ark. But they have this holy idea to the ark. The people stay back, and the priests, all out on their own, carry it out in front of them. And then the whole congregation, all of Israel, sanctifies themselves. That root word for sanctify, it's to be made holy. My best example I can think about this is a toothbrush. All toothbrushes are just toothbrushes except yours. Because your toothbrush is sanctified for your mouth. I keep getting Iris and Poppy's toothbrush confused. And Poppy lets me know when I give her Iris's toothbrush at night. She says, "That's Iris's toothbrush. That's crazy." And she won't use it because it's her toothbrush is sanctified for her mouth. The congregation is sanctifying themselves. They're setting them apart as gods. They belong to God. Doesn't necessarily mean any special than anyone else. It's about belonging. It's about holy difference, okay? And so we see this theme of holiness, both with the ark in the distance that they walk with it, and with the people as they set themselves up to God. And we're going to see the wording. Joshua said, the people, sanctify yourself, for tomorrow God's going to do wonders among you. And we're going to see that happen when they cross over the Jordan. And then the ark is what goes there in front of them. And so it leads them and they follow. We get a little pause before the crossing is going to happen. And to me, it's just God is encouraging Joshua. This big thing that he's been waiting decades for is about to happen. Maybe he's getting some second thoughts. And the wording here is that Joshua is exalted, which is not quite language that we tend to use about ourselves or our leaders. But here God says Joshua is exalted in all of the sight of Israel. And God reminds Joshua, Joshua, you are the one who will command the people. And so we see that happen in verse 9. Joshua says to all, draw near and get ready, essentially, because it's about to take place. I wanted to show you some of these mosaics. This is the one that we have used as the background image. That's kind of for it. And you've heard me say this before, is that there's a focus. We always think about Joshua about being the battle part. And, here's the walls of Jericho come tumbling down, down, down. And so you see that in a lot of them. There's also that carrying of the ark, and that is important. It's following the covenant. The ark is the one that goes before them. What you may not have noticed, though, is that sometimes when they carry the ark, it's over the river. And so here's a clearer version of that one. And so, they're going around Jericho. This one is more emphasizing the crossing of the Jordan. You may also, can you see what they're carrying in their arms? Do you see this? Did anybody read chapter 4? Do you remember what they do there?
Circumcision.
Oh, wait. Did I get my chapter wrong? No. That was
12 stones.
The 12 stones, yes. Yeah. And so here it's about the crossing of the river. This story is very important. It's not a story I feel like we talk about a lot. We do talk about the Red Sea, but this one is just as important of a story as the crossing of the Red Sea. It's redoing the story of Moses. And so just like they crossed the Red Sea and God saved them, now they cross through the river and they set up these stones to remember the wonders that God has done. And just like the Red Sea and the defeating of Egypt and Egypt's gods with the plagues became this reminder and this seal for Israel, even no matter when Israelites were in persecution or lived in diasporas or lived through Holocaust, that story was central to the reminder that God is with them. So is this story. It's not one that we tend to talk about as much, but it's just as big of a deal. And so Joshua commands them to all get ready. And then he's going to say, this is what we're getting ready for. We're coming for all these different tribes. And he begins to list all of them. You remember Ed Lester? He was here. So every time Ed would read a list like this was how he did it. And I just want to tell you this because you'll never unhear it. So we're going to drive out before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the termites and the Hivitites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. Every time Ed would read a list with all the ites, he would throw in the termites. And so when you're in church and you hear this list, just throw in your mind the termites because they're one of them too. That was totally not a deflection from saying we're going to wipe out the tribes. But I just always thought that was hilarious. Every time I read a list, I always hear Ed saying the termites. And what I'm calling this it's the water miracle 2.0. That first one was the crossing of the Red Sea. Now we're going to see the crossing of the Jordan. And so there is a description sort of on how it's going to happen. And in the next little section, it gives a little bit more details about that. But then they cross over the arks in front. Here's a picture of that. So the ark goes out in front. That pushes back the water. Remember, it's God the one is doing the work. And all of the people go through, and then the ark is going to kind of follow it. And we get just some details on how that crossing happens. We're going to kind of go through this part just a little quicker. The ark is in front. There's details about the river. I'm not really sure why this is in here, besides it's a note about the season or the timing. Rivers flood and shrink And that's not as important to us who get our food from Walmart. But when you depend on a river to grow your crops, it's a lot more important to pay attention to when it floods or not. And so this gives the dimensions of the river and how far back that it goes. I have no idea why that's there. It seems really random to me. But there's just some details about the river and the boundaries of the river and notes about the flooding. And then they're going to cross over it. And so it's the water miracle 2.0. Any questions on this chapter? Okay. We're going to jump into chapter 4. I was going to make a note. I kind of struggled to make verse summaries, so I did bullet point summaries of everything kind of happening in this section because this chapter 4 is a little bit repetitive and kind of says the same thing. But this is the 12 memorial stones. You've heard me talk a lot about stones. That's something my family did a lot. We would talk about Ebenezer stones. These are not the Ebenezer stones, but they're pretty much the same thing. It's the idea of stones or markers of when God does something. And so we will end with a option to have a discussion in our tables about stuff God has done. We'll do that in our smaller groups. And I will encourage you to write those things down like we often do in this group. And we're getting another picture of that. So there are 12 memorial stones that they're going to set up. So as the priests stand out there in the middle of the river holding the ark, 12 of the Israelites are to get 12 large stones, carry them and lay them at the feet of the priest in the middle of the river. Those 12 tribes, or the 12 stones represent the 12 tribes. And this is a memorial. It's a way to remember the crossing of the Jordan. And what we'll see repeated in this text, it's so that when their kids see this really large river that I'm assuming is not a river a lot of stones wash up on, they're going to go, "Hey, Dad, why are those stones out there?" And they're like, "Have I never told you the story about when the whole Jordan River dried up and we walked across it? Let me tell you about that one." It's a way to remember. The story is a big deal. We write down, we remember the things God has done, particularly those big eventful moments. And it's like a little mini Ebenezer stone moment. The Ebenezer stone comes from the second part of Samuel, in 2 Samuel. But it's essentially the same thing. And so we're seeing this way of remembering this great act that God has done. Then we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but for some reason there's this random thrown in paragraph right here in verses 10 through 18. And it's the number of Israel's fighting men. And so as all of the people cross over, there's this mention given to the army, essentially, of the 2.5 tribes. Oh, I knew I put that star somewhere. That's where they are. That's where they just crossed. And they're over here. They're like south of Jericho now as they crossed over from Shittim, and there's Jerusalem. But there's this reference to the 2.5 tribes because, remember, not all of the tribes crossed over, just the army. And then there's this note about, and the number was 40,000 men. And when I read that, the first thing my brain thought was, who is the 40,000 referring to? I'm sure everyone else thought that when you read that. Did anyone think that? No?
Yeah, I did.
Did you? Thank
I did.
you. Okay.
Yeah, I was curious.
Yeah.
And when I looked it up, it said that meant that those were the fighting men, and then when you count in all the other Israelites, well over 1 million.
So, well, we'll talk about the numbers in a second, but it's unclear, textually what they refer to, and so, it could refer to, the fighting force of all of the tribes. It could be referring to the fighting force of the 2.5 tribes. It could also be referring to 1/3 of the fighting force of the 2.5 tribes. Yeah.
I thought it was the sons of the men who had died the previous 40 years. Yeah.
Yes, well, and it's like a current consensus, but way back in the book of Numbers, we get this fighting force. When they do in Numbers, they give they do a census, and there's 603,550 men, which is a lot bigger than 40,000. And when you add up the ones for the 2.5 tribes, you get also quite a bit more than 40,000, which is why some of the commentaries will refer to it as like that one, maybe it's 1/3 It's because it's 1/3 of the number of that. Here's just one point to say about that, though. Remember that this is writing about a late Bronze Age, but it's written during the late Iron Age. In the Bronze Age, you couldn't have a standing army of 40,000 men. The whole population region of all of like the Canaanite tribes would not even be around 40,000. There wasn't enough food in the area to supply that much. It's kind of a random note in that, but this is just one of those markers. This is writing about the Iron Age. Remember, this is writing about King Josiah going to reconquer. That number could be a leftover number that's the actual like King Josiah's fighting force. It's more consistent with that as a history period. But also, 40,000 is a symbolic number, just like all of these numbers, when that like 603,550 is a symbolic number for other reasons that we talked about way back in the book of Numbers. We won't get into it here. But 40,000, remember 40 is also this number of something new. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and God made the world new. 40,000, we've amplified that. This is bringing something new. And so if you get too concerned about the number, don't freak out too much. God's doing something new. Some people came over there. They're ready to go to battle. I circled that part about the late Iron Age, so you can hold on to that. We get there at the end of the chapter, though. We revisit this story. This one just seems like a thrown-in kind of paragraph from later. But we are going to come back to these 12 stones. So they're going to camp at Gilgal. That was where I had the star. They're just kind of south of Jericho. It's just west of the Jordan River. And that is, these stones are set up so that you can remember the story of the crossing of the river, just like we remember the story of the crossing of the Red Sea. There's significance to remembering and holding on to these stories. So we're going to take 4 minutes, and then we'll get to chapter 5. Setting up stones, writing things down, singing songs, making poetry, or writing down songs help us remember and share things as God has done. And so if you have a story to share, what is your story to share about something God has done in your life? We can share that with those around us. I'm going to get some more water, and I'll be right back. And then if you have a story you want to share to everyone, I would love to hear your story too.
That's water. Yes, I love it.
What's the worst thing you hear about what God has done? We don't have enough time. We don't have infinite time.
Southwest, we went to bed on Saturday night. I had a dream that I was with some Navi there. Very well. Dream of my body. We're in the hall.
Something was very small. We land on the we're not there are fire trucks out there. And they tell us it's a challenge and it's off in buses. The situation is not quite as caused to determine it. Well, that never happens. And then they come on and say, it appears that there was a light that indicated that there was some fire. Realizing it's not the reason. We were
we can walk down Boulevard.
My traveling.
And things happen. We've done this dozens of times. And this one time, there's a little
I was
sign
sitting
there.
between, I was sitting next to this couple. So I began
Memorized the
where we're
number.
gonna stay.
Got
Make
home,
reservations. Well, we
got home, called the number.
There's
Half
one
an hour
is
later, we met them.
Ajalon,
Called
that weird sounding
We've been trying to work
country
out.
that was part of the United States. She had a separate standalone. She was from there, she was married to the Parisian guy.
It's right in our ball.
Some spoke words that she spoke better English than she had. And they helped
We put our eyes on the market. Started working, buy it, buy it.
But as we sat there, and I'm in the
I
front.
was at the tail end, I'd finished my divorce. There was a lot of complications. We were having, I was having this. So, when we owned the house, we told them we just up front. And I said, we probably need 3 months. So long.
Let it be.
We'll do one more minute.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's my story. Anybody else?
Parisians, they spoke English right next to you, it's really good.
I had to go
So it was a
I love you. I hear like glimpses of the stories. Would anyone have a 20-second version you'd want to share with everyone, like with the whole group?
With your teeth.
I can share one, but it won't be 20 seconds.
25?
All right, so when Janie and I first met, she was taking me around Knoxville. We looked in all the neighborhood, we saw this one house, this little cottage. And for years later, in the meantime, we got married. But for years later, we drive by this neighborhood to see if any houses were sale specific in this cottage. But it never was, nothing ever came. So one night I had a dream that I was in the Holy Land, the restaurant, Southern. So I was there, sitting in the window with some friends of mine from Naples, Florida. I'd lived there for 30 years and moved up here. So they were saying to me, you can't live in Naples for 30 years and come to Knoxville. It's totally different. I said, well, not just that. And I pointed across the green, the playing field. I said, that's the house I'm going to live in right there. And you can see how the gable to our cottage there. So I got up and told Janie about it the next morning, and we came to church and went home, went for a walk down the boulevard with our puppy. And Jane said, on the way home, let's check that out. And just go down and see if anything's going on. Well, there's a little sign saying for sale by owner, which you can't put signs up in our neighborhood. But this person had. So we talked to the realtor about half an hour later, and about 45 minutes later we were in the cottage looking around. And we thought we might not be able to afford it, but we could. And then we had just gone through a divorce, so there was lots of financial stuff still settling. And so we asked if you know, we asked some friends what we could do and so on. And the realtor in the middle of it all said, oh, his girlfriend was the owner. She turned around and said, oh, I'll finance it for you for the next 3 years. And we said, well, I only need like 3 months, 6 months at the most. And she said, 3 years, just in case. So we did it, and everything worked out in 3 months or so. We financed it and stuff at the lowest rate you can imagine. So that cottage was the house we'd always picked. It was our dream. Every single day we pinch ourselves and say, this is our gift from God.
Can't believe, yeah. End up
We have, I'm sure more of us have stories like that. It's moments they could be life-changing. They could even be some of the smallest moments. But writing them down is special. Setting up your pillar of rocks can be important. And you know I'm a fan of writing those things down. Share them with each other. Especially like, you know, next summer when I'm not here anymore. I want to come back and visit and hear your stories. So write them down for me. Send them to me. Because they're encouraging. Okay. We're going to jump into chapter 5. Chapter 5 is a little funny. Okay, chapter 5 is the covenant getting renewed. And so we're going to see that covenant being renewed with this next generation being circumcised. And so it starts off with all of the Canaanite kings are worried. Because these ones that they've heard about the Israelites coming. They have crossed over the Jordan. They're like, oh my gosh, now they're coming for us. And so they're calling each other, and they're all starting to get worried. They're beginning to lose heart. It's a little bit of foreshadowing. And then we're going to see the cutting of a new covenant. Right? There's a funny picture up there. And so with circumcision is a sign of a covenant. It is very common in throughout cultures, but also in the way beginning of how covenants were cut. You use the language cutting. You do cut something. And so if you remember the story of Abraham, Abraham has this vision, and they lay out these animals. I think that the largest is a goat, and it descends down in 7 until it gets to like a dove that's cut in half. And that is something like that is typical where blood is shed as you cut new covenants. Or like how a lot of, like you'll see in movies still like people cut their hands and shake hands, like blood is shed. And it's a sign. In that story of Abraham, they would walk through, and if both parties would walk through, and it's like, if I don't follow this covenant, may I be like one of them. So this idea of cutting covenant, of blood being shed, it's there, it's in the beginning. And so we see that take place also in circumcision. You may ask, why would you wait until you're about to begin your campaign to cut a covenant like this, particularly with your fighting force? And remember, because we're doing the strategy all wrong, because it's not really Israel who fights the battle, it's God who does. Okay? And so if you are getting ready for a military campaign, I don't recommend this strategy. But the reason that we are doing it now is because there is a whole new generation. Like Susan had mentioned earlier, all those other men had died off. I think it's like 20 aged and up. All of them went away in that 40-year waiting period in the wilderness, besides Joshua and Caleb. And so this whole new generation has not been circumcised yet. They have renewed themselves to the covenant. And remember, we are obeying the law, because anyone can follow God if you follow the law. And now this generation with Joshua is. And because why not? We're also going to have a Passover. And so the reason we're having a Passover is because it's time to have a Passover. That's just the date. And so this is to emphasize that you are following the covenant. It happens on the 14th of Nisan, which I knew someone would ask, and I Googled it. It's April 1st this year is when Passover starts, or something like that. And so the way Passovers look today is that you have that thing called the Seder meal. That's the ordered meal. That's like the stereotypical thing we think of as Passover. But just like our Christmas season starts with the big day, but it's also a season. That's how Passover is. And so Passover is celebrated because they're following the covenant. And for the very first time, they're going to eat the food of the land. And what that means is that there's going to be no more manna. And so it's a new era. It's a new time. We love the manna, but now it's gone. I might email you guys a song that's just hilarious about manna that we just didn't have time to play today. But and this is going to end with Joshua's vision. So just as a review of what we have done, we have prepared ourselves to get ready for what's going to start, I guess not next week because Amy will be here, but the week after that, when they actually go up to Jericho. And we're gonna reenact the walls tumbling down. I might just have something set up in here that we can knock over, but we might not march around the building, but we might. Depends on the weather. We at least will march around this room. And so Joshua, though, is going to have this vision as the last step. And so we saw in chapter 1 that Joshua was called. Joshua was reassured. We saw then in chapter 2 with the story of Rahab that anyone can be included into this. I want to make sure I'm not getting my chapters wrong. We saw the crossing of the Jordan River. And then we saw in chapter 4, we set these stones to remember. Now we're seeing like the last stages. We have been circumcised. We have celebrated Passover. We've done all the things God has asked us of it. We are ready. Joshua was feeling insecure. Now he's ready to go. And then he has this vision. He has a dream where God talks to him. And he meets the angel. And so if you remember in the story, he sees this angelic being, and he asks, "Are you for us or are you for our adversaries?" And the angel responds, "Neither. I am the commander of Yahweh's army." And then he gives Joshua a command, "Take off your sandals because you're on holy ground." And so you'll see in this icon of it, so Joshua is taking off his sandals. Remember, this is reminiscent of Moses at the burning bush. He's on holy ground. God is giving you something to do. And the angel, though, and the story that we want to hold on to is the question, when am I trying to put God onto my side versus me putting myself onto God's side? It's a very good question to ask. I asked the group last night when we do this, what are some examples of today? And it was Dave Irwin said like when we're like about football games. And that's a very good, easy thing to state. It's very easy to say, like, when I pray God will let my team beat you, or when, UT wins, we're like, God's with us because we're UT and we won. Like, that one's not as offensive. It's not as uncomfortable. But there are other examples, too, where we do the same thing. That's kind of like that. And so that's what we're going to end for about 5 minutes to talk about. Yeah.
2 weeks ago, you asked us a question of how to get on God's side rather than us being on God's side. That's not exactly what you said.
Yeah.
But it was God's side against, how do we get on God's side instead of us being, what was it?
About us putting God onto our side.
What's the answer to that?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay. So it's the same, this question.
Yes, it's the same one. And it's the food for thought for chapter 1. And that one I worded, how do we decipher between God's call and human ambition or nationalistic goals or something like that. Because sometimes those things, or like my football team, they're easy to put together. But they're kind of the opposite. I was listening to the radio this week, to Christian radio, and I had an old man moment where I sounded like my dad. But Poppy was in the car with me, and we were listening to it, and the little talking people came on the radio, and they had this story like, what stories do you like to share to believers versus non-believers from the Bible? And one of them spoke, and she was like, I like to tell the story of David and Goliath because I think it's relevant for everyone, how God will always fight for you. And I yelled at the radio. I said, that's bad theology. And I turned the radio off. And Poppy's just sitting in the back, like, whatever. But like, that's like, it sounds like an innocent statement, but it's the opposite. When we go throughout this, it's not about us pulling God to my agenda. It's not about God, what God can do for me. It's the opposite question. I think some examples that like we use today is like with Christian nationalism, when we say like God is fighting for my country versus me fighting for God's kingdom, and those sound very similar, but they have opposite meanings. Or like if a lot of people talk about the prosperity gospel, Like, if I follow God, God will give me the new car, the new Lamborghini. Versus like, there's acknowledging my blessings when God arranges a cottage for us, versus I'll follow you, God, if you give me this. Or you're going to fight for me so that I can have this. Does that make sense where we see that line? What are ways for you that you've seen some of the difference in that? Or ways you've caught yourself? Because I catch myself with that at least once a day. I'm going to have to tell the Wednesday group that they were more talkative, which was opposite than it usually is.
I think one thing is our patience.
Ooh.
We want it in our time.
Yeah.
Frame, not always in God's.
Well, we want our answer too.
And we want our,
And we
yeah.
want it now. So I still don't have a good idea of that.
I think that's a good thing to hold on to. And wording it in simple terms is, when am I putting God on my agenda or my side versus me getting onto God's side? I think that can be as complex of a struggle that we go through our whole life, and that is good to struggle with one like that. Hold on to that. That becomes a theme throughout Joshua. I think Joshua itself recognizes that own tendency when people have read this book. And that's why the story, like the story of the angel, gets emphasized in it. Next week, I will miss you all. I hope you survive the winter chaos that comes this weekend. I'll be in Denver, and it's like not even snowing there. If my plane actually makes it. And so be here with Mother Amy, and come back that first week of February as we will do chapters 6 through 8. And here that is as just that preview. We're going to begin to see some of the very first battles. So that battle at Jericho and Ai, which we're going to do something fun for Jericho. And so the Lord be with you. My God, we thank you. You are a God who's bigger than our football games. You're bigger than in and out groups. You're a God who calls all people, a God who works with everyone, including us. May we join you in the work that you have in the world. Amen.
Amen.